first type of question we're going to look at are these function interpretation questions. So at the end of the day, all you really need to do with these questions is to line up the numbers that are provided with what they represent. So let's start with 34 on this one. 34 is in parentheses. That means it's replacing the V that was in parentheses. So I need to figure out, what does V represent? And this is where I'm actually going to start looking at the rest of the question. Notice that I started with the main question. I would highly recommend starting with the main question, the question that comes at the end whenever you're dealing with any sort of a word problem. I recommend doing this because a lot of the times you can ignore the rest of the question, or like we're about to do in this case, you can cherry pick the parts of the question that you need to focus on and ignore the parts that you don't. This is going to save you time, it's going to save you mental energy, and it's going to keep you from picking a distractor answer. Anyway, we were looking for V. What does V represent? Right here it says V meters per second. So basically, we're looking for an answer that has 34 meters per second. We can see answer A has 34 meters per second, B does not, C does not, and D does not. So right off the bat, we just got our answer, A, 34 meters per second. Let's take a look at one more of these for good measure. Again, I'm going to go straight to the main question, and we see what is the best interpretation. So we've got interpretation. Again, we have, P of T this time, so telling us right off the bat that this is a function. And let's start with 0. So since 0 is in parentheses and T is in parentheses, let's figure out what T represents. T is the number of years since the study began. So we're going to look for an answer that has either 0 years since a study began, or probably just the beginning of the study, since at the beginning of the study, no time has passed. Okay, so the first answer says when the study began. So that's good. B says when the study began, so we're going to keep that one as well. C does not have when the study began, so I'm getting rid of C. D does not have when the study began, so I'm getting rid of D. And now it's just between A and B. Now, this time I will have to go ahead and check out the other number. So let's focus now on that 1800. Since 1800 is on the right side of the equation, 1800 should be the thing that we are calculating, right? It says the function P gives, and this language gives will often tell us what that is that we're calculating, the estimated number of marine mammals in a certain area. So I'm looking for 1800 marine mammals. Answer A. 102 marine mammals. No. So A is out, and B has to be my answer. And indeed, it does say 1,800 marine mammals. The estimated number of marine mammals was 1,800 when the study began. Our next question type is a sentence boundary or punctuation question involving the word however. Let's try to make this as simple as possible. You have 3 options. Either however is going to begin a sentence or independent clause, however is going to be in the middle of a sentence or independent clause, or however is going to come at the end of a sentence or independent clause. And I keep saying or independent clause because if we have a period after the word pizza, we have 2 sentences, right? But technically, if we change this to a semicolon, which acts like a period, then this becomes lowercase. Technically, this is only 1 sentence, but we can still think of it like 2 sentences. I just wanted to use the technical term independent clause. So really, this is what you should be looking for. And process of elimination does work well here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's look at A to start. We have a comma before however, but we do not have a comma after however. So this doesn't quite look like any of our options on the left here, but you might know that a colon always comes after an independent clause. So we could think of this as our third choice, where an independent clause is ending with however. Let's feel that out and see what it looks like. Latin America is known to have dozens, if not hundreds, of popular dance forms. Only 5 of these dances are included in international ballroom dance competitions, however. That sounded all right. Let's read it and finish the sentence as well. Only 5 of these dances are included in international ballroom dance competitions, however. Rumba, samba, cha-cha, paso doble, and jive. The last of which, okay. So we are ending our independent clause with however. There's a colon, and then there's a list. And introducing a list after an independent clause is the most common thing that colons do on the digital SAT. So that seems like it definitely works. And just from that, I know that A is our answer. But let's talk about the other choices just so you know how to confidently eliminate them. Choice B is claiming to do what our second pizza sentence here does, where we have however in the middle. We already know that there's an independent clause that ends with however. And we could also end with the word competitions. So if that's our independent clause, then however's in the wrong place to be in the middle. So we could stick it at the beginning here. We could stick it in the middle after dances, but this is not the middle. So we can get rid of B for that reason. Choice C is actually looking kind of good as well, because we know that we have an independent clause that ends with however, and that's exactly what's happening with choice C. A semicolon, in case you didn't know, acts just like a period most of the time on the digital SAT. So if we think of that as a period, then that seems good. So then what's the problem with choice C? Well, choice C is using a semicolon instead of a colon. So I said that a colon can introduce a list after an independent clause. That said, after a colon, we don't need to have a full sentence as our list. We can have either a full independent clause or just a fragment after a colon. But with a semicolon, we need to have 2 independent clauses. And if we start reading from that list, rumba, samba, cha-cha, that's not a full sentence. That's literally just a list. So C is out. And then choice D is claiming to do the thing that our first sentence was doing, where we have a sentence starting with the word however, right? But this is saying that the sentence starts after competitions. So we would have however, rumba, samba, cha-cha, paso doble. So again, we have that list and we're just adding the word however before that list. It's still just a list of items. It's a big noun phrase, which is not a full sentence. So we cannot have an independent clause here. D is out. Let's take a look at one more of these just for good measure. I've got my 3 pizza sentences for reference. So let's go through these. Choice A, we have a comma before however. In fact, all of these answer choices, we have a comma before however. So we know that it is not going to be like our first pizza sentence no matter what. So choice A, we have however, and then we don't have any punctuation after however. If you notice in our options here that are left over, we should either have another comma after however, or we should have something that ends the independent clause. Last time it ended up being a colon, which is not as common, but typically we're looking for either a period or a semicolon. Choice A is not doing anything, so that doesn't work. Choice B, there's also no punctuation after however, so we're going to get rid of choice B as well. Choice C, we have a comma before. Again, they kind of hid it from us. It's up here. And we have a comma after, so it's acting like number 2 there. So let's see if however is interrupting the sentence the way that we want it to. In paleontology, the term Elvis taxon gets applied to a newly identified living species that was once presumed to be extinct. Like an Elvis impersonator who might bear a striking resemblance to the late musical icon Elvis Presley himself, an Elvis taxon is not the real thing. Okay, I stopped right there because that was an independent clause. So the whole interrupting our independent clause thing isn't going to work. To make it easier to kind of see what I'm seeing or hear what I'm hearing, we can get rid of the first part of this sentence. So this whole first part is just a big introductory phrase, basically. And our main sentence is an Elvis taxon is not the real thing. We can also check anytime you have something that's set off between commas and a little comma sandwich, we should be able to get rid of it and everything should hold together. So if we have an Elvis taxon is not the real thing, it is a misidentified lookalike. That sounds like and is two sentences. So if we kept it that way, we would have a comma splice here. That doesn't work. And then just to be sure, by process elimination, we know it's D, but let's see how it works. We have a period here. So our third pizza sentence, right? We can start from the word and again. An Elvis taxon is not the real thing, however. Boom. We're good. So again, if you see one of these sentence boundary questions that involves the word however, just remember our pizza examples. All right, our next question type, I'm going to call solving for something that is not just X. We're not actually solving for X here. We're supposed to figure out the value of 6X. And what a lot of students will do is they will solve for X and then turn it into 6X, which we could do. But we run the risk of solving for X and then choosing X as our answer. If we try to solve for 6X right off the bat, we're probably going to be better off. So let's see if we can do that. The first thing I want to do is, well, what I really want to do is get rid of this square root, but right now the square root's not by itself. So I want to get rid of that 4 so that the square root's by itself. So right now 4 is being multiplied by the square root of 2x, so I'm going to divide by 4. Let me actually rewrite it. So we divide by 4. So now we have the square root of 2x equals 4. Cool. All right, now let's get rid of that square root. And to get rid of it, we're just going to square both sides. So now 2x equals 16. So how do we get to 6x? Well, multiply both sides by 3, right? So we multiply this whole thing by 3. 6x equals 16 times 3. You could be lazy and safe and use your calculator like I just did, or you might know that 48 is 16 times 3. Are we solving for 6x? Yes, we are. 6x equals 48. Our answer is B. Let's look at one more. And sorry, there was some weird formatting going on. This is supposed to be 30x, so I'm just going to move this over here. Boom, we know that's 30x. Now here we have a system of equations, and usually you're just going to want to graph systems of equations with the Desmos calculator. But let's see if we can use that system that we just used, since it's asking for something other than x. It's asking for 30x. I can see here that these guys will cancel out if I add these two equations together. And I'll do this down here. 5y minus 5y is 0. 10x plus 5x is 15x. 11 minus 21 is negative 10. So we're going to add 10. We have 10 equals 15x. And what did we say before? We're not going to solve for x. We're going to solve for whatever they want. They want 30x. So we're going to go ahead and solve for 30x. Multiply this whole thing by 2. 20 equals 30x. Boom. So our answer is 20. So again, with those, you really just want to solve for what they're asking for instead of solving for x. Our next question type is going to be questions with charts or graphs in the English section. These can be a bit intimidating because it feels almost like the science section of the ACT. But I've got a nice two-step process to simplify these questions. Step 1 is to eliminate any answer choices that don't support the claim or the example or the hypothesis or whatever it is that is being referred to in the question. On this one, we have an example. For example, and it says complete the example. So let's find out what we're exemplifying. These measurements can be used to compare the glaciers. So basically, I want to make sure that my answer choice compares the glaciers. And notice at this point, I haven't even looked at the actual graph, which is cool. At least I think it's cool. Okay. The Gorner Glacier had a larger area than either the Fischer Glacier or the Unterar. Sorry, I'm going to butcher these names. Okay, so we are comparing the glaciers with A. Had a smaller area than the, also comparing C, a smaller area than, a larger area than. So all four of these are actually making comparisons, which means we're not going to eliminate any of them. We're going to move on to step 2. Step 2 is to eliminate answer choices that are false. So now we're going to look at the actual chart. So A says the Gorner had a larger area than either of these. So basically the Gorner should be the largest area, right? If we look here, the y-axis is area. It did have a larger area than the other two. So it looks like A's probably our answer, but let's just make sure here to be safe. A smaller area than, no. A smaller area, no. A larger area than Fischer, but smaller, no. We can clearly see that it has the largest area, so A is our answer. Boom. All right, let's try one that's a bit more challenging here. So again, our first step is to simply eliminate answers that do not support the hypothesis or the example or whatever it is that's being asked for. Here it says we want to support the research team's conclusion. So we need to figure out what that conclusion is. Now, at this point, I could read the entire thing, but I'd probably be wasting time unless I feel like I'm not going to be able to find a conclusion. Conclusions usually come at the end. So I'm going to look at the last sentence here. However, the team also concluded, so there's our conclusion, those tools were likely more challenging to obtain. Those tools being prized tools made with sea floor shells. So basically sea floor shell tools. So I want to eliminate any answers that don't support the idea that it was difficult to obtain sea floor shell tools. Got it? Okay. A, at each depth below the surface in the cave, the difference in the number of tools of each type suggests that shells were easier to collect from the beach than to harvest from the seafloor. Okay, so that does support the idea that it was harder to obtain seafloor shells. It's saying those were harder to obtain than the beach shells. B says the highest number of tools were at a depth of 3 to 4 meters below the surface, which suggests that the Neanderthal population at the site was highest. Okay, that's not even talking about the sea floor shells. So B is out. See how step 1 is actually pretty useful here? At each depth below the surface in the cave. Okay, again, this is not talking about sea floor shells being more challenging to obtain. So C is out. Again, step 1 here, super helpful. And we haven't even looked at the table, which is really nice. D, the higher number of tools at depths of 5 to 6 meters, oh my goodness, that also is not about seafloor shells being hard to obtain. So just like that, we have an answer. And this time we didn't even have to look at the table. The next question type is exponential word problems. You're going to know that you're dealing with exponential word problems if you see an exponential equation. Just to give you a quick refresher here, a very simplified version that I find helpful to remember is y equals a times b to the t, where y is your total, a is your starting point, we'll say initial, b is going to be your percentage increase or decrease. I'm just going to put percent there. We'll talk about that in a second. And then t is just time. How much time is it's taking to either increase or decrease by whatever percentage. So that's simplified, but I find it super useful. As you can see, we have all the things that we're looking for. And like all word problems, I like to just start with the main question to figure out what I want to focus on. Here it's asking us, what is the value of n? So I will have to go back a little bit more. It says, according to the model, the population is predicted to increase by 4% every n months. Okay, so now we know that N is referring to our time. So we're going to want to look in the corner here where time exists, right? And here's the cool thing. Whenever they're asking us to just, increase by the percent that's already given, in this case, 4%, in order to just increase by 4%, we really just want to raise this whole thing to the first power, right? Because if you raise anything to the first power, it doesn't change. So the question you want to ask yourself is, what can I multiply this by to turn it into 1? Well, we have a fraction, which is kind of annoying, but an easy trick with fractions is multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal being the upside down version or the opposite of the fraction. So if we have 6 over 4t, we're going to multiply by 4 over 6, and that's going to give us 1. So based on that alone, our answer should be 4 over 6. Now, there's one thing I forgot to mention. With exponential word problems, especially if they are after question 20, which this is question 25, you're going to want to check for trickery. And when I say trickery, I mean a lot of the times the time that they ask you to solve for is not the time that's given. So here it's asking us every n months, but it says he years after 2003. So our original equation is in years. We want to convert it into months. So we know that if we were talking about years, it would be 4 over 6 years, or 4/6 of a year. We just need to convert that into months. So how many months are in a year? That's right. There are 12 months in a year. So something out of 12 basically needs to be equal to 4 over 6. And it's pretty clear here, we multiply 6 times 2 to get to 12, so we would multiply 4 times 2 to get to 8. If you wanted to, you could also cross multiply here. So 6x equals 48. Again, divide by 6. We're going to get 8 either way, right? So our answer is A, 8. Let's look at one more of these exponential word problems. So this one, looking super annoying, right? I don't want to read all that. Like I've mentioned before, let's just go straight to the main question and see if we can skip some of that stuff. Which of the following equations best represents this model? Okay, so I'm going to actually stop right there because I know that I'm just choosing the equation that matches the model, right? So if I look at my answer choices, what's the only difference between all of my answer choices here? That little bit in parentheses, right? So in parentheses, that's our B, which should be percent, right? Cool. So let's ignore most of the words here and just try to find the percent. Boom, 190%, increased by 190%. Something that's easy to remember is if you're adding percent, you're just going to multiply by 1 point whatever. So like, let's say I want to add 59%. I'm going to multiply by 1.59 because I have my original 100% from the 1 plus I have 59% from the 0.59. So we might be thinking to add 190%, we would do 1.9, right? 1.9? No, because if you think about it, we have our original 100% plus 90%, but we don't want to add 90%. We want to add 190%. So how the heck do we do that? Well, 1.9 is 190%. So it would be 1, and then we would add 1.9, and we would get 2.9. So I think the trickery here, and that's going to be D, which is really nice. And look at that. We pretty much didn't read this entire thing. We just found the percent and that was it. But I guess the trickery here was anytime there's a percentage over 100 and you're adding it, just don't forget that you're actually adding on top of that 1. So 190% is going to be 2.9. 290% would be 3.9, so on and so forth. Our last question type is verbs. You are definitely going to be encountering some verb-based questions on your May exam. And these are really easy if you stick with this strategy. The first thing you're going to want to do is find the subject. In this case, I see a writing technique that blank. So my subject is a writing technique. And the second thing you want to do is simplify your subject. Instead of a writing technique, we want to turn that into a pronoun. A writing technique is a singular thing. So a writing technique would be it. Now you're going to match your simplified subject, which should be a pronoun, and put that simplified subject right next to the answers and eliminate any answers that don't work. In fact, let me move my simplified it over here. It create? No. It are creating? No. It have created? No. It creates? Yes. How beautiful is that? I don't care what the rest of the paragraph says. All I care about is, does my simplified subject match one of these answers? And real quick, just to explain why A, B, and C don't work. I mean, you can hear it. It doesn't sound right. They're all plural. We would say they create, they are creating, they have created. It, which is singular, goes with creates. It creates. Now, there is a fourth step. If it matches more than one answer, you're going to match the tense. But most of the time, this is going to do the trick. All right, so we have another one here. I would argue this one's a tiny bit more complicated, but we're going to use the same steps, and it's going to be pretty easy. So it can sometimes be hard to find the subject in this situation, but the cool thing is we can get rid of phrases that are sandwiched between two commas, because anything sandwiched between two commas is, unnecessary or additional information that can be removed from the sentence. So that's all extra information. That's all extra information. So we have such iconic references. Let's simplify that. I would say that the main subject there is references, and we want to ask ourselves, is that singular? Is that plural? References, that's more than one reference, so we're going to change it to plural, they. They represents, no. They has represented, no. They was representing, no. They represent. Again, we didn't even have to go to step 4 there. Let's do one more where I show you step 4 just so you can see how that looks. All right, so this one is interesting because we are actually starting a sentence with a verb, which is pretty rare. So I figured this would be a good sort of oddball one to show you. But let's see if we can still get this strategy to work. What or who is our subject here? Created by businessman William A.G. Brown. Okay, well, if it was created by businessman William A.G. Brown, then William A.G. Brown created it, right? So our subject is William A.G. Brown. William is typically a male name, so we're going to use the pronoun he. Let's go through the next step. He created. That sounds good. He creates. That sounds good. He creating. That does not sound good. He create. That does not sound good. Okay, so we're down to either he created, the past tense, or he creates. This is where we need to use step 4. How are we going to decide if it's past tense or present tense? Well, an easy way to do it, hopefully, is to just look around for other verbs starting with the same sentence. Are there any verbs in the same sentence that would tell us what tense we're in? By golly, was. The saloon was known. So we're in the past tense. Past tense, he created. So now you have some specific strategies to deal with some of the most common types of questions on the digital SAT. But I can guarantee you're not going to remember them unless you practice them. At the time of this recording, Revolution Prep is offering proctored digital SAT practice exams for free. The cool thing is these digital practice exams are administered using an interface that is nearly indistinguishable from the Blue Book app. If you want to get registered for one of these practice exams today, just go ahead and use the link in the description.